He was a king of the digital age, a man whose code shaped the very architecture of modern life. Marcus Thorne's net worth was a number so vast it had become an abstraction, a figure capable of erasing national debts. She was a waitress, a fleeting presence he registered with the same level of interest as a salt shaker, just another functional object in the opulent world he commanded. Inside the Obsidian Room, a bastion of old New York wealth, where conversations were held in hushed, reverent tones, Marcus decided to entertain his guest. Convinced she was nothing more than a pretty, vacant face, a girl whose world extended no further than the kitchen doors, he began to speak to his associate in the rich, guttural tones of Gulf Arabic. He critiqued her posture, mocked her tired eyes, and made a crude joke about her life's ambitions. It was a catastrophic error in judgment. He assumed her universe was as circumscribed as his perception of it. He could not possibly know that the mind behind that serene, professional mask was forged in the crucible of high-stakes diplomacy, that her ears were tuned to the subtle inflections of power and persuasion. He did not know that the language he was wielding as a casual cudgel was the very lullaby of her childhood. Her eventual response would not merely puncture his monumental ego, it would detonate a carefully constructed, multi-billion-dollar deal and force him to confront the hollow man behind the legendary name. The Obsidian Room's ambient sound was a carefully curated symphony, and Alara Vance knew every note. It was a delicate fusion, the whisper of heavy silk curtains, the discreet clink of Villeroy and Boch porcelain, the low baritone of men discussing market caps and capital gains, and the spectral glide of servers across a carpet, so thick it seemed to absorb all sound. Each element was a ghost from a life she had meticulously buried, a life of embassy balls and state dinners. Here she was simply Leah, the quiet waitress, the one who could recite the day's specials with a soft, even cadence, who could carry a tray laden with seared foie gras and aged balsamic without a single tremor, and whose polite smile never quite thawed the profound sadness in her deep grey eyes. The uniform, a severe high-collared black dress and a starched white apron, felt less like clothing and more like camouflage. It was a world away from the tailored diplomatic attire of her past. A year ago, she had been Alara Vance, only child of the brilliant but controversial Ambassador Thomas Vance. She had come of age not in a single home, but in the gilded, politically charged embassies of Damascus, Riyadh, and Amman. Arabic, in its many dialects from the formal Fusha to the lyrical Syrian vernacular, was not a subject she had learned. It was the air she had breathed. She had translated informal dinner conversations for her father, debated geopolitical strategy with attachés, and learned to read the subtle language of a tilted head or a half-closed eye long before she could legally vote. Her father had been a master of his craft, a man who understood that diplomacy was not about treaties, but about trust, built over countless cups of bitter coffee and shared stories. But his career had ended in a blaze of scandal, a manufactured accusation, a political betrayal that had left him disgraced, stripped of his post, and broken. The life of privilege had vanished overnight, replaced by whispers, shame, and the cold reality of a tarnished name. The name Vance, once a key that opened any door, had become a liability. Alara had fled, not from wealth, but from the wreckage. She came to New York seeking the profound anonymity that only a city of 8 million souls could offer. She wanted to build a life that was entirely her own, forged by the ache in her feet and the strength of her own hands, a life where no one knew her father's story. The crushing irony she often thought while polishing silverware until her own reflection stared back was that in her desperate attempt to become a person, she had succeeded only in becoming invisible. To the titans of industry and the scions of old money who frequented the obsidian room, she was a function, not a human being. A pair of hands to pour their wine, a voice to take their order. Tonight was a Tuesday, but the restaurant was humming with its usual controlled intensity. "Leah, table 4 requires the sommelier," Mr. Dubois, the formidable but fair manager, would murmur as she passed. "The Carters at table 11 are ready for their check." She would nod, the small professional smile fixed in place, and glide to her next task. She was a flawless performer, her movements a study in efficiency. Her mind, however, was an ocean away, drifting through the memory of the scent of night-blooming jasmine in a Damascus courtyard, or the intricate tilework of a Jordanian mosque. These memories were a double-edged sword. They were a testament to her past, to a world of depth and complexity she understood intimately, but they also cast a harsh light on the stark simplicity of her present reality. The dissonance was almost surreal. She could have been a State Department analyst, a corporate liaison for a global energy firm, or a university lecturer on Middle Eastern policy. Instead, she was here, patiently explaining the provenance of the beluga caviar to a woman whose diamond bracelet was worth more than a 4-year college education. She was clearing the plates from table 6, a retired couple celebrating their 50th anniversary, their quiet affection a small, warm beacon in the room. "May I recommend the Grand Marnier soufflé for 2?" she'd suggested warmly. "The chef is particularly proud of it tonight." Their delighted agreement was a genuine, uncomplicated moment that made the endless performance bearable. It was a reminder that wealth did not always corrode the soul. As she relayed the order to the pastry station, she saw them enter. 3 men, but one of them moved as if he were the room's center of gravity, the other 2 merely satellites caught in his orbit. The man at the center was Marcus Thorne. Even if his chiseled, perpetually dissatisfied face hadn't been on the cover of every major business magazine for the past 5 years, she would have known he was someone of immense consequence. It was in the sharp, predatory angle of his jaw, the way his eyes swept the room, not with curiosity, but with the cold appraisal of an emperor surveying his domain. His suit was a bespoke creation of such dark, rich wool that it seemed to absorb the light around him. The host, a nervous young man named Michael, greeted them with a practiced, deferential smile. Marcus Thorne brushed past him without a word, his gaze landing on the prime corner booth, a secluded alcove offering a breathtaking view of the city lights. It was, of course, already occupied. "I want that table." Thorne's voice was not loud, but it possessed a resonant timbre of absolute command that sliced through the restaurant's gentle hum, causing several conversations to falter. Michael paled. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Thorne, but that table is reserved. The reservation was made several months ago." Thorne emitted a short, incredulous bark of a laugh. "Reservations are suggestions. Find out who is sitting there and move them. My company is about to invest over $1 billion in this city's infrastructure. I think I'm entitled to a comfortable seat." Before Michael could wither completely, Mr. Dubois materialized at his side, his posture as impeccable as his tailored suit. He had navigated the treacherous waters of New York's elite for 40 years. Egos like Thorne's were simply turbulent currents to be skillfully navigated. "Mr. Thorne, it is an honor to have you with us," Dubois said, his voice a smooth, calming balm. "While that particular table is unfortunately unavailable, I have prepared our finest window table for you. Table 15. The view is, I assure you, equally spectacular." Thorne's eyes narrowed. For a tense moment, Elara watched, expecting an explosion. But one of the men with him, a distinguished-looking man of Middle Eastern descent with kind, weary eyes, placed a subtle hand on Thorne's arm and murmured something in a low voice. Thorne acquiesced with a put-upon sigh, as if being denied his first choice of table was a profound and unjust suffering. Mr. Dubois, sensing the crisis was averted, gave a discreet nod in Ilara's direction. "Your server will be Leah. She is our most capable." He then guided the trio to table 15. A cold knot of apprehension tightened in Ilara's stomach. It was her section. She took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed her apron, and collected 3 heavy, leather-bound menus. She affixed her professional smile, a shield she had perfected over months of practice. As she moved toward the table, she felt Marcus Thorne's gaze sweep over her, a quick, dismissive scan that catalogued and discarded her in a single instant. She was just another part of the evening service, a ghost in his machine. She had no inkling that this routine act of taking a dinner order was about to ignite a fire that would reshape both their lives. The atmosphere at table 15 was several degrees cooler than the rest of the room. Marcus Thorne sat with a rigid posture, a portrait of simmering indignation. He drummed his fingers on the crisp linen tablecloth, the staccato rhythm, an unnerving counterpoint to the restaurant's placid score. His companions flanked him, creating a tableau of power and its attendants. The Middle Eastern man, who Thorne had called Khalid, offered Ilara a brief, apologetic glance. The third man, older, with an impeccably tailored suit and the sharp, watchful eyes of a lawyer, remained impassive. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Leah, and I will be your server this evening," she began, her voice a model of calm professionalism. She distributed the menus. "May I offer you some water to start? We have still, sparkling, or our house-filtered water." Marcus Thorne did not deign to look at her. His attention was fixed on a point somewhere over her left shoulder. "A bottle of the Screaming Eagle. The 92, he commanded, addressing the air in front of him. "And tell your sommelier not to bother me with the ceremony. Just open it and pour." Ilara's composure remained flawless, but her mind registered the order with a jolt. The 1992 Screaming Eagle Cabernet Sauvignon. It was a unicorn wine, a bottle that would fetch upwards of $20,000 if they even had it. It was a brutal, unsubtle declaration of power, meant to intimidate the very room he was in. "An excellent choice, sir," she replied, her voice unwavering. "I will check on its availability immediately." She turned to the other men. "And for you, sirs?" Sheikh Khalid seemed flustered by his host's imperious tone. "Just sparkling water for me, please," he said, his English accented, but precise. "We will need a moment with the menus." "We will not," Thorne interjected, finally glancing at the menu with a sneer. "What's the most decadent thing on this menu? Don't recite the specials. I want the thing that gives your chef the most trouble." Ilara's training was a fortress against the onslaught of his rudeness. "Our head chef prepares a 7-course tasting menu, sir, the alchemist's journey. It utilizes extremely rare ingredients, including Japanese otoro and white truffles flown in this morning from Alba. It requires significant preparation." "Fine. That. All 7 courses," Thorne declared, snapping the menu shut and dropping it on the table. His cold blue eyes finally met hers, and for a disorienting second she saw a void, a complete lack of recognition that she was a fellow human being. He was looking at a talking machine. He then turned to his companions. "You two, order whatever you want. My treat." Sheikh Khalid, clearly trying to inject some civility into the proceedings, ordered the pan-seared scallops and the Dover sole. The lawyer, whom Thorne called David, quietly requested the risotto. "Very good, gentlemen," Ilara said with a professional nod. I will place your orders and have the sommelier attend to your wine." As she walked away, she could feel the weight of Thorne's gaze on her back. She kept her posture erect, her stride measured, refusing to give any outward sign of the humiliation that was beginning to burn in her chest. It wasn't simple rudeness. It was a deliberate, theatrical contempt. The casual cruelty of a man who had never been denied anything. A man who saw common courtesy as a currency for lesser mortals. She found Mr. Dubois by the sommelier station and relayed the wine order. The manager's eyebrows shot up almost imperceptibly. "The 92 Screaming Eagle," he murmured, a flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, in his eyes. "Mr. Thorne enjoys making a statement." He turned to the sommelier. "Check the deep cellar. I believe we have one bottle left." Ilara retreated to a quiet alcove in the service corridor, leaning her head against the cool wall for a moment. She closed her eyes and inhaled slowly, forcing the image of the tranquil embassy gardens in Ammon into her mind. The scent of olive trees, the sound of the call to prayer echoing from a distant minaret. She centered herself, pushing the anger down. He was just a customer, an exceptionally unpleasant one, but a customer nonetheless. This was her job. This was the life she had chosen. When she returned to the table with a silver tray bearing the sparkling water and 3 delicate glasses, the men had switched languages. The sound of it hit her like a physical blow, a pang of profound, homesick longing. They were speaking Arabic. It was the formal, educated dialect of the Gulf, a language she knew with the ornate intimacy of a native speaker. It was the language of her father's work, of her childhood friendships, of poetry and history and home. She approached the table with the practiced silence of her profession. They were engrossed in their conversation and didn't seem to notice her arrival. Marcus Thorne was speaking, his Arabic fluent and confident, but it was the rigid, textbook fluency of a Westerner who had learned it in a boardroom, not a living room. It was a tool, sharp and effective, but without soul. "The initial proposal is an insult, Khalid," Thorne was saying in Arabic. "He thinks because this is a government project, he can bleed me with 1,000 cuts. He doesn't grasp the scale of the technology. My platform isn't an addition to his smart city. It is the city. He needs me far more than I need his sovereign wealth fund." Sheikh Khalid sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Marcus, you must appreciate the cultural context. Business here is not a transaction. It is a relationship. It is a slow dance. The minister is testing your patience, your respect for the process. If you approach him with this aggression, the deal will collapse. This is not Silicon Valley. You cannot disrupt your way to a partnership." "Respect," Thorne scoffed, a humorless smirk playing on his lips. He leaned back, his gaze sweeping the room before it landed, with deliberate and pointed condescension on Ilara as she began to pour the water. "You speak of respect. Look at this girl." Ilara's hand didn't waver. The water flowed in a silent, perfect arc into Khalid's glass. But inside her, time seemed to slow down, the blood turning to ice in her veins. Her heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. He was talking about her. He was using the sacred language of her past as a shield, a secret code to dissect and humiliate her while she stood mere inches away. The world contracted, the murmuring symphony of the restaurant fading into a dull, distant roar. The only sound she could hear was the crisp, arrogant Arabic flowing from Marcus Thorne's mouth, each word a perfectly polished stone of contempt aimed directly at her. She continued her task, a perfect automaton of service, her face a serene, unreadable mask. But behind the mask, her mind was a supercomputer, translating, analyzing, and absorbing the poison with a devastating clarity. "Look at her hands," Thorne continued in Arabic, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. He gestured with his chin. "They're not the hands of a lady. They are rough, the hands of someone who toils. You can always judge a person's true place in the world by their hands." Sheikh Khalid shifted, his discomfort palpable. He darted a nervous glance at Ilara, a hint of shame in his eyes. "Marcus, this is uncalled for. She is merely doing her job." "Precisely. Her job," Thorne sneered, elongating the word as if it were a foul taste in his mouth. "This is the zenith of her life's ambition. To carry plates for men like us, to smile and hope for a generous tip so she can pay the rent on some miserable little apartment in a borough no one has ever heard of. It's pathetic when you think about it." Ilara placed Khalid's glass on the coaster with a preternaturally steady hand. The storm inside her was no longer just anger. It was a cold, gathering fury. He wasn't just being a bore. This was a calculated exercise in dehumanization. He was leveraging the perceived veil of language to deny her basic dignity, to render her a non-entity while she performed her duties right in front of him. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was what truly staggered her. He believed his wealth and his command of a second language had crowned him king, and she was just a serf in his kingdom, deaf and dumb to his pronouncements. "I'd bet $1 million she doesn't have a single thought in her head, beyond remembering who gets the fish and who gets the steak," Thorne continued, clearly warming to his subject. He took a sip of water, his eyes glinting with a cruel amusement. "Probably couldn't find your country on a map, Khalid. Her greatest intellectual challenge is figuring out how to open a wine bottle without breaking the cork." This time, Sheikh Khalid looked genuinely appalled. "Please, my friend, let us return to the matter of the deal. The minister values humility above all else. This is the antithesis of that. Humility is a virtue invented by the poor to make themselves feel better about being poor," Thorne retorted, his voice dropping as Ilara remained at the table, pretending to adjust the silverware. He wanted her there. He wanted an audience, even one he believed was oblivious. "Look at that sad little uniform. She looks exhausted, worn out by life before it's even begun. This city eats girls like her for breakfast. The final attack, the casual dismissal of her entire existence as something to be devoured and forgotten, was the breaking point. A cold, diamond-hard resolve formed in the core of her being. The anger was no longer a hot, churning emotion. It was focused, sharp, and lethal. He had mistaken her servitude for subservience, her silence for ignorance. He had taken a language she loved, a language of intricate poetry and profound faith, and used it to spew his petty, baseless venom. He had no idea who he was talking to. He had no idea of the world she carried inside her. She thought of her father. Ambassador Vance had taught her that language was a bridge, a sacred tool for understanding, for building respect, for seeing into the soul of another culture. Marcus Thorne was using it as a bludgeon, a secret handshake for the morally bankrupt. In that moment, he was not just insulting Leah, the waitress. He was defiling the very principles her father had dedicated his life to. He was desecrating her entire world. She finished straightening a fork that was already perfectly straight. She let his final words hang in the air between them. "She has nothing. She is nothing," Thorne concluded with a note of supreme satisfaction. "Now, about the zoning permits for the central data hub." Ilara straightened to her full height, her spine a rod of iron. She held his gaze for a fraction of a second longer than a server should. She let the silence stretch, just for a beat. In that beat, she was no longer Leah, the waitress from the obsidian room. She was Ilara Vance, daughter of a diplomat, a woman who had conversed with princes and negotiated with tribal elders in this very language. She gathered the sum of her unique, shattered life, the years of education, the sting of her father's fall, the raw pain of Thorn's insults, and she prepared to dismantle his world. She took a small, imperceptible breath. It was the calm before the lightning strike. He had no idea of the storm he had so blithely summoned. Her moment was coming. All she needed was the perfect opening, and it was now just seconds away. The sommelier, a Frenchman named Luc, arrived at the table with the grave solemnity of a high priest. The 1992 Screaming Eagle was presented in a custom-made cradle, its label facing Marcus Thorn. "The 1992, monsieur," Luc intoned. Thorn gave it a cursory glance and an impatient nod. "Proceed." As Luc meticulously worked the cork from the bottle's neck, Elara stepped forward, her order pad held loosely in one hand. She positioned herself at the head of the table, directly in Thorn's line of sight, a silent, waiting presence. She waited as the sommelier poured a small tasting amount into Thorn's glass, and then stepped back respectfully. Thorn swirled the deep garnet liquid, gave it a perfunctory sniff, and took a sip. He nodded once. "Acceptable." Luc filled his glass before turning to the others, who both politely declined. The sommelier placed the legendary bottle on the table and made a discreet retreat. The stage was now hers. Elara looked from Sheikh Khalid to Marcus Thorn, her expression a perfect mask of professional calm. "Have you gentlemen decided on your appetizers, or do you require another moment?" she asked in crisp, clear English. Thorn waved a dismissive hand, his attention on his wine. "We already told you. The tasting menu for me, scallops and sole for him, risotto for him." "Is your memory failing you?" he asked, his tone thick with condescension. David, the lawyer, opened his mouth as if to intervene, but Elara spoke first. Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the air with the chilling precision of a shard of ice. She did not speak in English. She spoke in flawless, classical Arabic, the formal, poetic Fusha that was the language of scholars and kings. "Sir, with the greatest of respect, my memory is perfectly intact. I was merely affording you the courtesy of confirming your order, a small pillar of service with which you may be unfamiliar. Given your attention, seems more captivated by the state of my hands than the quality of your menu." The effect was not gradual, it was instantaneous and absolute. The universe at table 15 did not just pause, it imploded. Marcus Thorn, who had been raising his glass, froze mid-motion. The $20,000 glass of wine halted inches from his lips. His face, moments before a mask of smug superiority, went utterly slack with pure, uncomprehending shock. His eyes widened, his jaw unhinged, as his brain short-circuited, struggling to reconcile the sound he had just heard with the person who had produced it. It was a total system crash. The neat, simple box he had placed her in, poor, uneducated, invisible, had just been vaporized. Sheikh Khalid's reaction was no less dramatic. He physically recoiled, a sharp gasp escaping his lips as he stared at Elara with a wild mixture of horror, disbelief, and a dawning, incredulous awe. His face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. The woman they had been casually vivisecting, the woman Thorn had dismissed as nothing, had just responded with a level of linguistic and cultural sophistication that was not just fluent, it was aristocratic. Her accent was purer than his own. The third man, David, the lawyer, was perhaps the most telling. His professional impassivity dissolved. He simply stared, his mouth slightly agape, but his sharp eyes were already calculating, processing the catastrophic implications of what had just occurred. Ilara remained perfectly still, her cool grey gaze locked on Marcus Thorne. She let her words hang in the air, a devastating monument to his boorishness. She was not finished. Still speaking in the same calm, formal Arabic, she continued, her voice resonating with an authority that belied her simple uniform. You also made observations regarding my ambition. Permit me to clarify. My current station is a deliberate choice, an exercise in understanding a world from the ground up, a perspective you seem to have forgotten, if you ever possessed it. It is an exploration of the dignity of labor, a concept that may be as alien to you as the humility Sheikh Khalid was attempting to describe. She then shifted her gaze to Sheikh Khalid, her tone softening infinitesimally, but losing none of its steel. "And you, Sheikh," she addressed him in Arabic. "I recognize your discomfort, but silence in the face of such casual cruelty is its own form of consent. A lesson in character, as vital as any term sheet, I assure you." The Sheikh flinched as if struck, nodding mutely, his face a portrait of profound shame. Finally, she turned her gaze back to the utterly poleaxed Marcus Thorne. He was pale, his mouth still hanging open. The Titan of tech had been reduced to a gaping, humiliated man. She switched back to perfect, unaccented English, her voice now cool and businesslike, each syllable a tiny hammer blow. "So, to confirm, one alchemist's journey tasting menu, one pan-seared scallops followed by the Dover sole, and one white truffle risotto. I will inform the kitchen immediately. Will there be anything else?" The standard question, "Will there be anything else?" was transformed into the most devastating rhetorical blow of the night. She had not raised her voice. She had not used a single insult. She had simply taken his own language, his own arrogance, and used it to construct a mirror, forcing him to gaze upon the ugliness of his own reflection. She had done it with a poise and dignity that made his earlier behavior seem not just cruel, but primitive and pathetic. Marcus Thorne was incapable of speech. He could only stare, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and fury. He had built an empire on his uncanny ability to read people, to anticipate moves, to always be 5 steps ahead. In the span of a minute, a waitress in a black dress had completely and utterly dismantled him. She had beaten him at his own game, on a field of his own choosing, and had done so while flawlessly performing her job. Without another word, Ilara gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, turned with a crisp, professional pivot, and walked away, leaving a silent, gaping crater of shock in her wake. The symphony of the obsidian room played on, oblivious. But for the 3 men at table 15, the world had been irrevocably knocked from its axis, and the architect of the earthquake was the waitress who was now calmly, methodically entering their order into the kitchen's point-of-sale system. The silence that descended upon table 15 was a heavy, suffocating thing. Sheikh Khalid stared at Ilara's retreating form, his expression a chaotic blend of mortification and profound respect. David Chen, the lawyer, had recovered from his initial shock and was now looking at his client, Marcus Thorne, with an expression of clinical horror, as if observing a catastrophic industrial accident in slow motion. Marcus himself remained frozen for a long moment, the wine glass still clutched in his hand. He slowly, mechanically, set it down on the table. A fine tremor was visible in his fingers. What the hell was that?" he finally managed to croak, his voice a hoarse rasp. He spoke in English, the secure confines of his secret language, now a source of burning, radioactive shame. Sheikh Khalid shook his head, looking down at the white tablecloth as if it held the answers to the universe. "She understood every word, Marcus. every single word. Her Arabic, it wasn't just fluent, it was noble, the Arabic of diplomats and scholars. Thorne's shock began to curdle, transmuting into the familiar, hot rush of fury, his lifelong shield against humiliation. "Who is she? This is a setup. She was recording us. It's blackmail." He was already reaching for his phone, his mind scrambling through a Rolodex of the most ruthless attorneys in New York. "I'll have her fired. I'll sue this restaurant into a parking lot." "Fired for what?" David Chen finally spoke, his voice low and dangerously calm. "For doing her job with impeccable professionalism? For being multilingual? For responding to a series of vile, personal insults that you delivered in what you thought was a secret code?" David leaned forward, his eyes boring into his client. "Think, Marcus. There are no grounds for dismissal. There is no lawsuit. There is only the reality that you behaved like a complete and utter fool, and she exposed you. Any move you make against her will only amplify your own monstrous behavior. It will make you look not only cruel, but weak." The food began to arrive, delivered by a different server, under the watchful, hawk-like gaze of Mr. Dubois, who orchestrated the delivery from a distance. The exquisite plates of the tasting menu, the perfectly seared scallops, the fragrant risotto, they were placed before the men like museum pieces. None of them touched their food. Thorne shoved his plate away, the delicate arrangement of O Toro and caviar wobbling precariously. His mind was a trapped animal, pacing in a cage of impossibility. A woman like that, working here? It made no sense. The quiet authority, the classical accent, the piercing intelligence that had flared in her eyes. It was a contradiction he could not resolve. He stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the polished floor. "Where are you going?" Khalid asked, his voice strained. "To find out who the hell she is." Thorne strode toward the front of the restaurant, a man on a collision course. He found Mr. Dubois standing near the host station, his expression a placid mask. "You," Thorne began, forgoing any preamble. "Your waitress. Table 15. I want her name. I want to know who she is." Mr. Dubois regarded him with an unnervingly calm expression. "Her name is Leah, sir. Is there an issue with the quality of her service?" "An issue? You could say that," Thorne snapped. "I want to see her employment file, her full name, her background, everything." Mr. Dubois' posture seemed to gain an inch in height. "Sir, I can assure you that all of our staff are thoroughly vetted. Their personal information, however, is private and confidential. I am not at liberty to share it with a patron." "Do you have any idea who I am?" Thorne hissed, resorting to the bludgeon he always used when subtlety failed. "I could buy this building, and your pension along with it, before my coffee gets cold tomorrow morning." "I am fully aware of who you are, Mr. Thorne," the manager replied, his voice still a velvet-covered brick. "And I have a professional obligation to protect my staff from what appears to be unwarranted harassment. Leah is an exemplary employee. Unless you wish to file a formal, legitimate complaint about her professional conduct, this conversation is concluded." Thorne was apoplectic. To be stonewalled by a glorified maître was an indignity he had not experienced in decades. He was about to unleash the full, terrifying force of his power to make the call that would indeed jeopardize the restaurant's very existence, when Mr. Dubois let out a soft, almost pitying sigh. "Let me offer you a piece of advice, Mr. Thorne. Free of charge," the manager said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "For your own sake, go back to your table. If you are wise, you will pay your bill, leave a generous tip, and walk out of that door. And then you will pray to whatever God you believe in that what happened here tonight goes no further. You have absolutely no idea what you have just stepped into." The manager's warning was so utterly devoid of malice, so freighted with genuine caution, that it stopped Thorne in his tracks. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning from a man who knew the terrain. What could he possibly mean? What was this waitress hiding? Defeated and seething, Thorne returned to the table. He slapped his black American Express card down. "Check." David Chen looked up from his phone, his face pale. "Marcus, I've been making some inquiries while you were gone." His voice was tight with urgency. "I have a few contacts, old friends from my time in international law." Thorne's head snapped up. "And?" "The waitress. Leah. It's short for Ilara," David said quietly. "Her last name is Vance." The name meant nothing to Thorne. "So?" David took a deep breath. "Her father is Thomas Vance." The name hit Marcus Thorne with the force of a physical impact. Thomas Vance. Ambassador. Thomas Vance. The legendary, brilliant, and ultimately disgraced American diplomat. The man who had been the architect of American policy in the Middle East for 2 decades before a spectacular fall from grace. A man who, despite his official disgrace, was still rumored to be a personal confidant, a trusted friend, to nearly every powerful family in the Gulf, including the family of the very minister with whom Thorne was negotiating. Suddenly, the disparate, nonsensical pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. Her aristocratic fluency, her unshakable poise, the manager's cryptic warning. She wasn't a nobody who had learned a language. She was the daughter of the man who had written the modern playbook on US-Arab relations. "Oh God," Thorne breathed, sinking back into his chair. The rage evaporated, instantly replaced by a cold, hollowing dread that started in his gut and spread through his limbs. "It gets worse," David said, his face grim. "My contact says that, while the ambassador was publicly ruined, the relationships he built were personal. They were built on honor and respect. They transcend politics. The Gulf families never believed the official story. To them, he is still a man of immense integrity. And he was known for 2 things above all else: his unparalleled understanding of their culture and his fierce, almost fanatical devotion to his only child, Ilara." Thorne's gaze drifted across the restaurant. He saw her at a service station, calmly folding linen napkins, her movements precise and graceful. She was not a waitress. She was a living legacy. She was the daughter of the one American who held more personal capital in the Middle East than the State Department itself. And he, Marcus Thorne, in his infinite, godlike arrogance, had called her pathetic, exhausted, and unintelligent. To her face, in her own language, the dread in his stomach coiled into a knot of pure, unadulterated panic. His entire deal, the crowning achievement of his career, a project that would redefine his legacy, was now balanced on the razor's edge of a knife. And the person holding that knife was the waitress he had just tried to crush for sport. The ride back to his penthouse was a silent, suffocating journey through a city that suddenly felt alien. Marcus Thorne stared unseeingly at the glittering tapestry of Manhattan, a kingdom he had conquered, now a potential ruin. He had left both David and Khalid at the restaurant, unable to bear their silent, accusing presence. His mind was a feedback loop of horror, replaying his own words, each one a fresh stab of self-loathing. He hadn't just insulted a waitress. He had committed an act of cultural sacrilege in front of a key business partner, and insulted the daughter of the one man whose invisible influence could vaporize the entire deal. Inside his stark, minimalist apartment, a glass box in the sky that had always felt like a fortress, he went straight to the bar and poured a tumbler of Macallan 25. The room, his global command center, with its panoramic views and bank of glowing monitors, felt like a cage. He brought up every file his intelligence team had ever compiled on the minister and his inner circle. He searched for the name Vance. It was everywhere. Ambassador Vance was cited in footnotes, mentioned in asides, quoted in interviews. He was the ghost in their machine, the quiet architect of their worldview. And then he found it. A photo from a diplomatic reception in Dubai a few years prior. The minister was there, laughing, his arm around the shoulder of a distinguished American with kind eyes. Ambassador Thomas Vance. Standing beside him, looking poised and radiant in a simple blue dress, was a much younger Ilara. The same calm eyes, the same quiet confidence, the same soul he had tried and failed to trample on tonight. His private phone buzzed, a harsh, intrusive sound. It was David. "You need to fix this, David," Marcus said, his voice a low growl. "Call our lobbyists. Call the senator. I don't care what it costs." "You can't buy your way out of this one, Marcus." David's voice was flat, devoid of its usual deference. "This isn't about money or politics. This is about honor. I just got off the phone with Sheikh Khalid. He was deeply shaken." "What did he say?" Thorne demanded, his stomach clenching. "He said he was profoundly sorry, but he had an obligation. He had to call his uncle, who is the minister's chief advisor. He couldn't risk them hearing about this from another source. He told them that an unfortunate cultural incident had occurred." He was vague, but it doesn't matter. The very phrase, cultural incident, in a negotiation like this, is a death sentence. "So what does that mean?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "It means we're done. Khalid said the minister's trust is not in your technology, but in the character of the man who wields it. A man who would use his knowledge of their language to secretly mock a working woman is seen not just as cruel, but as reckless, unstable, a fool. In their world, a fool is more dangerous than an enemy." As if on cue, an email notification chimed on his computer. The subject line was chillingly polite. "Regarding our proposed partnership." It was from the minister's chief of staff. With a hand that trembled slightly, he clicked it open. The message was brief, formal, and utterly final. "Mr. Thorne, in light of recent information that has come to our attention, we have been instructed by the minister to suspend all further negotiations regarding the Smart City initiative. We believe there may be a fundamental misalignment of values that would preclude a successful long-term partnership. We wish you success in your future endeavors. Sincerely, Fahad Al-Qasimi, Chief of Staff." Suspend. Misalignment of values. It was the diplomatic equivalent of a guillotine. Billions of dollars, 3 years of research and development, the future of his company, all of it had just vanished. It had been erased by a few careless, arrogant sentences uttered to impress a man who was now an agent of his ruin. He hung up on David without another word. He stared out at the city, but he didn't see the triumphant glow of his empire. He saw the calm, knowing, grey eyes of Ilara Vance. She hadn't made a single call. She hadn't uttered a single threat. She had simply existed, and in doing so, had revealed him for exactly what he was. His arrogance wasn't strength. It was a fatal flaw in his own code, and it had just caused a system-wide crash from which he might never recover. The crushing weight of it all finally landed. It wasn't the loss of the money that hurt the most. It was the sheer, monumental stupidity of it. He, Marcus Thorne, the master of the universe, had been undone by a waitress. For 3 days, Marcus lived in a self-imposed prison of glass and silence. He ignored the frantic calls from his board, the panicked texts from his executive team. He drank scotch and stared at the email. The polite, damning words burned into his consciousness. The rage had subsided, leaving behind a vast, empty landscape of a feeling he had never truly known. Helplessness. This was a problem he couldn't bully, buy, or sue into submission. It was a problem of character, and the character was his. He couldn't get her out of his head. Not the deferential waitress, but the woman who had emerged from that shell. The quiet dignity with which she had absorbed his venom, and the even quieter power with which she had turned it back on him. He had spent his life climbing, clawing his way to the top, and in the process he had forgotten that the people below him were people. He saw them as functions, obstacles, or tools. Ilara Vance had forced him to see a human being, and in that reflection he had been forced to see the gaping void in himself. On the fourth morning, he awoke with a cold, sober clarity. The deal was dead. Any attempt to resuscitate it would be a fool's errand, only compounding the original sin. The money was gone, but something else, something intangible, could perhaps be salvaged. A single shred of his own humanity. There was only one possible path forward. It was an action so alien to his nature that the mere thought of it was physically nauseating, but he knew, with an unshakable certainty, that it was the only move left on the board. He had to apologize. He didn't send a lawyer. He didn't send a gift. He went himself. He arrived at the Obsidian Room in the dead hours of the late afternoon. The restaurant was hushed, the staff engaged in the quiet rituals of preparation for the evening service. He wore simple trousers and a dark sweater, not the bespoke armor of his usual suits. He felt naked. He asked the host for Mr. Dubois. The manager appeared, his face a mask of wary neutrality. "Mr. Thorne." "I'm not here as a customer," Marcus said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual resonant authority. "I need to speak to Ilara. Is she here?" Mr. Dubois studied him for a long, silent moment, his eyes searching for any hint of a threat or a trick. He found none. He saw only a man who had been profoundly diminished. "She is in the back, preparing for her shift. Wait here." A few minutes later, Ilara emerged. She was in her uniform, her hair tied back, her face clean of makeup. She stopped when she saw him, her expression unreadable. There was no fear, no triumph, just a quiet, watchful stillness. "Miss Vance," Marcus began, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. "Could I have 5 minutes of your time?" She nodded wordlessly and led him to an empty table in the corner, the very same one he had so arrogantly failed to secure days earlier. They sat. The universe had been inverted. He was the supplicant. She held all the power. "I don't know where to begin," he said, staring at his own hands on the table. They looked brutish, clumsy. "So I'll start here. I'm sorry. What I said, what I did, it was inexcusable. It was cruel, arrogant, and founded on a profound and willful ignorance. There is no excuse." Ilara listened, her grey eyes steady. She did not speak, allowing the silence to force him to continue. "I have spent my entire life believing that success was a shield," he confessed, the words tasting like poison, "that my wealth and my position placed me on a different plane, with a different set of rules. I looked at you, and I didn't see a person. I saw a symbol of everything I thought I had transcended, and I was wrong. Horribly, catastrophically wrong." He finally dared to meet her gaze. "I know that my actions cost me a very important business deal. I want to be perfectly clear. I am not here to ask you to help me fix that. I am not asking you to speak to your father or to anyone else. That deal is gone. I deserved to lose it. I am here only because I needed to apologize to you. Man to woman, human to human, I needed you to know that you have changed things. You showed me a part of myself that is ugly and broken, and I can no longer pretend it isn't there." He fell silent, the confession hanging in the quiet air between them. He had said his piece. The rest was up to her. Ilara was quiet for a long time, her gaze analytical, as if she were studying a complex text. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, but carried an immense weight. "Do you know why I came to New York, Mr. Thorne?" she asked. He shook his head. "I left my old life because I was suffocating under the weight of a name. The ambassador's daughter. A political accessory. A symbol. I wanted to discover if Ilara Vance, the person, could exist on her own. If I had any intrinsic value, any strength that wasn't borrowed from my father's reputation." She leaned forward slightly. "When you insulted me the other night, you weren't insulting the daughter of Ambassador Thomas Vance. You had no idea she existed. You were insulting Leah, the waitress. And Leah, the person I have built from scratch these past 12 months, was strong enough to face you. Not with her father's influence, but with the truth. You proved to me that my strength is my own. It doesn't come from my name. So, in a strange and painful way, you gave me the very thing I came here to find." Marcus stared at her, speechless. Her grace was a more profound rebuke than any tirade could ever be. "I accept your apology, Mr. Thorne," she said. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I have no desire to carry your ugliness around with me. What you do with this moment is your own affair. You can go back to being the man who sat at this table 4 nights ago, or you can try to become someone better. That choice rests entirely with you." She stood, smoothing her apron. "I have to get back to work now." And with that, she turned and walked away, disappearing back into the quiet hum of the restaurant. Marcus Thorne sat alone at the table, the weight of her words settling over him like a shroud. He had come to fix a business problem and had instead been given a brutal, necessary lesson in what it meant to be a man. He had lost a multi-billion-dollar deal, but in its place, he had gained a sliver of something infinitely more valuable. A chance. As he walked out of the obsidian room into the fading light of the New York afternoon, he knew his world had been fractured. The path forward was a fog, but for the first time in a very long time, he felt as though he was finally seeing it with his own eyes. Across the city, Ilara Vance began her shift, tying the strings of her crisp white apron. It was no longer a costume or a form of camouflage. It was the uniform of a woman who had built her own sovereignty, one table at a time.